Well, good afternoon and welcome. So happy to see you all here today. My name is Jeff Nigro. I'm a research associate in the arts of Greece, Rome, and Byzantium here at the Art Institute of Chicago. And it was my great honor and pleasure to serve as research associate for this exhibition, Myth and Marble, Ancient Roman Sculpture from the Torlonia Collection. I was very happy to assist the co-curators of the exhibition, Lisa Chakmak, the Mary and Michael Jaharis Chair and Curator of the Arts of Greece, Rome, and Byzantium, and Catherine Raff, Elizabeth McIlvaine Curator. Katie Raff can't be with us today, but Lisa Chakmak is here in the back, so it's a co-curator of the exhibition. And this very exciting exhibition is here at the Art Institute on view in the modern wing until June 29th. And so let me ask, how many of you have seen the exhibition so far? Oh, almost everybody. That's wonderful. And you'll have time to go and see the show afterwards, and of course, again, you'll have until June 29th. This program is being held in celebration of that exhibition, and it is a program that I had, again, a great pleasure of working with our musicians, who I'll introduce in just a moment, to put together a program which would tie together art, music inspired by Rome, by ancient Rome, with the art of ancient Rome that is currently on display. I guess I'm one of those men who thinks about the Roman Empire once a day, but it's my job, so it's all right. But I wanted to do an art and music program because I love art and I love music. And except for sort of vague little traces of what might be ancient Roman music that we have survived, we don't have a whole lot of it. And so what we're doing today is a program which includes music of the 17th and 18th centuries that was inspired by ancient Rome. And as we'll see, it ties in to the themes and qualities of the exhibition, I think, quite well. So, before I go any further, let us welcome to the stage our distinguished musicians, Stephen Alltop, harpsichord and conductor, Josefien Stoppelenburg, soprano, Wendy Benner, violinist, and cellist Craig Trompeter. Very pleased to have four outstanding musicians who are brilliant at a lot of things, but particularly at the music of the 17th and 18th centuries. And let me introduce them to each of them to you, and I will do it in the order in which they're listed in our program. To begin with, Dutch soprano Josefien Stoppelenburg is best known for her dazzling vocal agility and her passionate and insightful interpretations. You'll hear evidence of that in a minute. Josefien has performed all over the United States, Europe, Asia, and South America as a Baroque music and oratorio specialist and as a concert singer. This season alone, she will be appearing with Ars Lyrica and Harmonia Stellarum in Houston, the Bach Society of St. Louis, the Indianapolis Early Music Festival, and Apollo's Fire, as well as at various concerts in the Netherlands. She has also performed for the Dutch royal family on several occasions. Josefien, I should say, is also a painter. You can look up her website at josephienstoppelenburg.com and see a lot of her beautiful and colorful work. Stephen Alltop serves as music director of the Apollo Chorus of Chicago, the Champaign-Urbana Symphony Orchestra, and the Elmhurst Symphony Orchestra. A specialist in oratorio and historical performance practice, he has been a member of the conducting and keyboard faculties at the Manes School of Music at Northwestern University, where he conducts the Alice Miller Chapel Choir and the Baroque Music Ensemble. Stephen has appeared with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra as both a harpsichord and organ soloist, and he has guest conducted orchestras and choruses in the United States, Europe, and South Korea, including leading numerous world premieres. Wendy Benner enjoys a richly varied artistic life as an orchestral, chamber, and solo violinist throughout the Chicago area. Her past solo appearances include concertos with the Bach Symphonia in Maryland, Handel Week Festival in Chicago, and the Columbian Orchestra, also Maryland. For 8 years, Wendy has served as concertmaster of the Bach Symphonia, leading the ensemble's transition from modern to period instruments in live performances and recordings on the Dorian label. In Canada, she has performed in the violin section of the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra, including a 2008 Grammy-winning ensemble performance. And last but of course not least, Craig Trompeter is the founder and artistic director of Chicago's acclaimed Haymarket Opera Company. As cellist and virtuoso on the viola da gamba, he has performed with Second City Music, Chicago Symphony Orchestra, Lyric Opera of Chicago, Chicago Opera Theater, Music of the Baroque, the Smithsonian Chamber Music Society, the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra, the Oberlin Consort of Viols, yay to my alma mater, and the Newberry Consort. He has also performed at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, as well as the Art Institute, the Glimmerglass Festival, Brooklyn Academy of Music, and the Valletta International Baroque Music Festival in Malta. So let us give another round of applause just for our distinguished performers. How the program is going to work today is that I will make some introductory remarks about the exhibition and some of the themes of the exhibition, which will then carry over into our first piece of music. Josefien and Stephen will also make comments in between my remarks and the music. Will come back to me. We'll be sort of doing discussion of the exhibition and the art interspersed throughout the program so that we can really show some comparisons between the art in the Myth and Marble exhibition and the music you will be hearing. And we will also be looking at some works of art that are not ancient, that are some of which are in the Art Institute and some are not, but to give you an idea of how these mythical stories, legends, historical figures, and the themes and ideas and aesthetics of ancient Roman art continue to inspire artists in later time periods. So to begin, those of you who have already seen the exhibition know, and most of you have, that it is on view in the modern wing at the Art Institute. This is, as we've been saying, historic for a number of reasons. The most important, the really first major exhibition of Greek and Roman art we've had at the Art Institute of Chicago in 44 years. And it is the first time that ancient works have been shown in the modern wing, on the first floor galleries, the Abbott galleries, the Buxbaum galleries, which are usually given over to contemporary photography and new media, and some works that are shown in our Mary and Michael Jaharis galleries of Greek, Roman, and Byzantine art as comparison to works of art that we have from private collections that are on loan to the Art Institute. This is the first gallery in the Abbott galleries, which is given over to Imperial portraits. The Torlonia Collection, I'll say a little bit more about, is the largest private collection of ancient Roman art still in existence. And there are 622 objects in the Torlonia Collection. We have 58 in our installation, 24 of which were especially cleaned and conserved for this venue and for this leg of this process of exhibiting the works of art from the Torlonia Collection. Of those 622 objects in the Torlonia Collection, over 200 are portraits. And it shows the importance of portraiture both to the collection, to Roman art in general, and to our installation, which, as you can see, highlights them here with the Emperor Augustus, surrounded mostly by imperial figures of the 2nd century when the Roman Empire was at its height, when sculptural production was at its height in the Roman Empire, and when the greatest strength of the Torlonia Collection in this area that also ties into works that we have either in the Art Institute collections or on loan to us. So it's all seemed like a natural fit, as well as being a lot of names that are familiar to a lot of people: Trajan, Hadrian, Marcus Aurelius, even Septimius Severus, even the horrible Commodus, Those who are, have seen, gladiator movies, you might have come across these figures. We also have displays of funerary art, of deities, gods and goddesses. We have the only bronze sculpture in the Torlonia collection, which is at the center of this gallery. Of course, in the interest of time and because we want to hear some music, I can't possibly talk about every single one of the 58 works in the exhibition, and I'll be concentrating on things that simply tie in most strongly to the themes that we want to present and the music you will be hearing. And then here are some of the deities that you can see in that same part of the installation. And then across the way, in the Buxbaum galleries, we have an installation which shows, again, some of the outstanding pieces of the Torlonia collection, including these figures here who are considered the three great icons of the Torlonia collection, these three portraits, as well as other works which display the concepts of the development of the collection, the idea of collecting, excavation, restoration, and all those kinds of related things that make this such an incredibly rich collection. Because, and I'll come back to this, one of the reasons we wanted to highlight the 17th and 18th centuries, which is because so many of these objects were collected during that period, revered during that period, and often restored during that period. And so you have this sense of a more recent Rome, what to people who specialize in ancient Rome consider modern, which is, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, and how these more modern eras have looked back to Rome, how they have restored these pieces, and it sort of enhanced, as they felt it, their beauty and their historical importance. The Torlonia collection was put together primarily in the 19th century and primarily in two very important ways. One is through the acquisition of collections belonging to other families in Rome, and the other was through excavations sponsored by the Torlonia family. One of the most important figures for this history is this gentleman, Prince Alessandro Torlonia, who was given, he and his family and other family members were given many, many titles by the popes in the 19th century. This was important to remember that up until 1870, Italy was not a unified country. Whether it is now is another question, but it wasn't then. And then in 1870, after the unification, things changed. But before then, Rome was the capital of the Papal States, with the popes ruling about a quarter of the Italian peninsula directly. And so the Torlonias, by being papal bankers and bankers to other prominent families like the Bonaparte family, were able to amass a great deal of wealth, which they put into collecting, and particularly to the collecting of Roman antiquities. And so Don Alessandro bought up, and his other family members bought up lots of land that they did excavations on, and they made a systematic sort of purchase of collections from other families that had fallen on hard times. The Torlonia family acquired, for example, the prestigious Giustiniani collection, which was primarily put together in the 17th century by Marchese Vincenzo Giustiniani, and the also prestigious Albani collection, which was primarily put together in the 18th century by Cardinal Alessandro Albani. And then they also acquired the contents of the studio of an 18th century sculptor and restorer named Bartolomeo Cavaceppi. And like many other sculptors working in 17th and 18th century Rome in particular, Cavaceppi really made a career out of restoring and adding parts that had gone missing to great works of ancient Roman sculpture. Up until about the middle of the 19th century, people didn't like looking at fragments. They didn't like looking at headless torsos and heads just lying there. I mean, they wanted something whole and integral. And so very talented sculptors like Cavaceppi, and even great geniuses like Gian Lorenzo Bernini, would be brought in to they felt, again, enhance the beauty and history of the sculptures by adding and restoring parts to them. And then those sections became part of the history of the sculpture. And so the kind of rich layers of history that Rome represents are represented in microcosm in a lot of these works of sculpture that you can see in the exhibition. For example, you see this crouching Aphrodite on the left, which is partly restored by Pietro Bernini, the father of John Lorenzo, and then the wonderful resting goat on the right. A huge section of the body is ancient. The legs are later restorations, as is the head, which was done by John Lorenzo Bernini, the great sculptor of Baroque Rome, of 17th century Rome. And you can see the virtuosic deep carving that Bernini is most famous for, the liveliness of it, and that wonderful facial expression, which everybody is enjoying as they look at this great work of sculpture. So would you want to take off a head done by Bernini just because it's not ancient? Of course not. This is this long, rich history, and again, the layers of history that go into these works, and this also inspires the music that you'll be hearing. As I mentioned, and as you know if you've seen the exhibition, portraiture forms a very important part both of the Torlonia Collection and of our installation. And as I mentioned, we wanted to concentrate on the 2nd century for a lot of reasons. These 2nd century emperors, often referred to as the adoptive emperors, because one emperor would adopt his successor. And as we've been reminding people, this is not adoption the way we often think of it today, where you adopt a baby and you raise it and love it and rear it and so on. This is a kind of administrative and political arrangement whereby an adult emperor, male emperor, adopts another adult male to be his official successor. And generally speaking, the results of this were good. These emperors are also often referred to as the good emperors, and I always put that good in quotation marks. Insofar as any autocrat can be a good person, they did all right for the most part. But we begin our story in the exhibition with the Emperor Trajan on the left. And this is a great example of how flexibility and understanding really helped to create an exhibition like this, because after it was cleaned at the Torlonia Foundation and they tested it, they determined that this bust of Trajan, is not ancient at all, that it is likely 17th or 18th centuries. And fortunately, the curators said, well, we already said we were going to take it. That's all part of the story. We're going with it. So we have this 17th, 18th century Trajan, and a statue of a woman restored as Trajan's wife, Plotina, a very strong, intelligent woman. And this, again, there's this sort of, layers of history, and if it sort of looks like Plotina, you can put a later head of Plotina on it. I will mention this again, but if you've been through the exhibition, you know that every label for every work in the exhibition has a conservation diagram, which was provided for us by the Torlonia Foundation, which breaks down visually which parts are ancient and original to the sculpture, which parts are ancient but not original to the sculpture, and which are modern, later 17th, 18th, 19th century restorations. The other theme that we explore in this portraiture section is the important role of imperial women. As we've been saying to people, there really was no equivalent female title to emperor. Imperator basically meaning sort of like commander-in-chief. And so they didn't call them empresses. Many empresses or emperors' wives, but were given the title Augusta, because the first Roman emperor, as we conventionally think of him, was given the title Augustus, which basically means revered one. And the women folk were often given this title Augusta, and it wasn't always their wives. Trajan's sister and niece were also given this title, Augusta. Trajan's successor, his seemingly hand-picked successor, Hadrian, who's here on the right, the first Roman emperor to wear a beard. Roman men had traditionally been clean-shaven in a sort of military way with a sort of military bowl cut as a hairstyle. Trajan started to wear a beard, and there were a lot of theories as to why. One popular idea being that he was trying to imitate the Greeks, that he loved Greek culture, Greek literature, philosophy, history, art, architecture, all of those Greek things, and so he wanted to look Greek. And then Hadrian was married to Sabina, who was actually Trajan's great niece. So Trajan's sister's daughter's daughter was Sabina, and so it is the women who provide the link. It is, the traditional argument was, the best man for the job picks the next best man for the job, and who cares about women and who cares about biology? It's all about the men. But in fact, it's the women who are the connecting links. They provide the bloodlines. They provide sometimes some wealth that is brought into it. And so it is that connection. It's almost like if you wanted to be the emperor, you had to marry Sabina because of her status. Now, you will notice when you look at the exhibition and you see these labels, there will be these labels that will say, portrait of a woman formerly known as Sabina. We can't absolutely prove in some instances whether these women are the empresses that we used to think they were. The Torlonias and their 19th century curators, two gentlemen of the Visconti family, were trying to be very systematic about having one of each, a portrait of each emperor, each empress. And so they may have indulged in a little wishful thinking sometimes about whether this was this specific woman or not. But we can't always prove it, and what complicates things even further is that generally, broadly speaking, portraits of imperial men are more individualized. Portraits of imperial women are more idealized. And so they all tend to look fairly similar, but then again, they're providing the links, they're providing the bloodlines very often. And sometimes, just everyday women, or at least patrician women, might style their hair and their affect to appear like the empress. So it can be very difficult to tell. Same thing happens with Hadrian's successor, Antoninus Pius, and this portrait of a woman formerly known as Faustina the Elder, who was Antoninus Pius's wife. Now we're actually not sure whether this is Faustina the Elder or not, but she is certainly wearing Faustina the Elder's characteristic hairstyle. As you can sort of see on this coin in the Art Institute collection, you can see she's got this sort of braided, wound braided top knot on top of her head. And on the back of the coin, this coin was made after Faustina had died and she had been deified, which was becoming increasingly common with imperial men and women. She's labeled Diva Faustina. And on the other side, the embodiment of eternity or eternitas to imply her immortality. And then the daughter of Antoninus Pius and Faustina the Elder, known as Faustina the Younger, married Antoninus Pius's successor, Marcus Aurelius. And of course, Marcus Aurelius has a huge fan base because he was also a Stoic philosopher as well as an emperor, and his meditations, as they're called, are still widely read and people still find them inspiring. But I love the fact that Lisa and Katie put this slide together because it shows you how important this connection was, because now we definitely have a portrait in the center of Faustina the Younger, although they used to think it was her daughter Lucilla. Shows you how complicated it gets. But Faustina the Younger was the daughter, wife, mother-in-law, and mother of emperors. And it is with Marcus Aurelius' successor, Commodus, that the whole thing comes crashing down, because Commodus was, unfortunately, a psychopath, and he was eventually assassinated. But there were not all marriages outside of the imperial family were quite so dramatic. And we find love and affection among married couples and the valuing of women insofar as it was possible in that particular culture. So in the section succeeding the portraiture section, and when you see this funerary art, we have this couple here holding hands in a time-honored way to represent union, and it was almost certainly used for a funerary context. However, this is one example of one of these wonderful sort of pastiches that form part of the Torlonia and many other collections of antiquities, because we know that a lot of the bodies are restored and the heads are of two different time periods and are not related to each other. So I love this detail where he's looking at her with such love in his eyes, even though it's not his wife and they're actually not wearing their own clothes. But it still conveys something, it's not kind of deeply moving. The story of Rome, the establishment of the ancient Roman Republic long before the empire, is attributed to at least in legend and Roman histories, to what was seen as the heroic act of a woman. Lucretia, a virtuous matron, the ideal model Roman matron, devoted, loyal, hardworking, was seduced and, trigger warning, sexually assaulted by Tarquin, the son of the last king of the Romans. Lucretia then took her own life, and that tragedy led the Romans to abolish the kings and establish a Roman Republic. This subject appears frequently in later art. This very powerful, dramatic painting by Titian, or upstairs in the Art Institute's collections, a Tarquin and Lucretia by Jacopo Tintoretto, be sure to notice when you see it, the strand of pearls around her neck that is broken and the pearls are falling to the floor as her innocence has been torn, her virtue has been torn. And then this painting by Rembrandt, which shows Lucretia about to take her own life. And it is very haunting and very poignant. And in the early days of Christianity, St. Augustine said that Lucretia's only crime was killing an innocent person herself. And that leads us to the first musical item on our program, this very powerful cantata by George Frideric Handel, La Lucrezia.
This work does come from very early on in Handel's career. He went to Italy at the age of 22, and the years 1707 to 1709 saw Handel establish his unrivaled genius, both to the Italians and to the world. It was during this time he wrote some of the most dramatic music of his life and some of the most virtuosic. This setting of Lucrezia is cast in unusual harmonies for the time. F minor, D flat major. These would have been quite potent in the unequal temperaments they used and the temperament that you'll hear today. It is also a work of great harmonic complexity, and for the continuo practitioners such as Craig and myself, it is sort of an epitome of that art in the hands of Handel. Now, Josefien will tell you more about the piece.
So this cantata, which is about 18 minutes long, starts right after the assault. And Lucrezia goes through all these emotions, the loathing, disgust, fear, sadness. And of course, it's a great way for a composer to display, all kind of compositional techniques, and for a singer to express all that in music. So at the end of the piece, after she has cursed Tarquinius, wished him constant insects and larves on his way, and may he fall into the abyss, nothing bad happens to him. So that is when she decides the only way for me to restore my honor is to take her life. But she also realizes that then she has to be avenged. So in a way, it's oddly empowering, if that makes any sense. And we hope you enjoy this very dramatic cantata. I promise there are some light-hearted pieces later in the program.
stili che fulminati ebbi tiranni impegnati a miei voti orridi strani poi con fuochi tonanti inceneriti Rio Tarquinio in Roma dalla superba chioma omai trabocchi il vacillanti allora sopra i suoli ingoragini Sicili commemorando esempio nelle viscere sue l'indegno il l'empia forse nel cielo, per castigo maggior del mio delitto, stati oziosi o provocati numi. Si son sorte le stelle, se non mioron le sfere, a voi tremenda deità, eredità della vista mi folgo. A voi, sospetta del tradito onor mio far la vendetta. Il suol chi primi l'oro che ispira l'empio romano s'apprese in dall'abisso dormon li furie, i sedegni e li vendetti. Dove dunque per me non assetti? Pietoso d'inferno, che già sono in odio al cielo aditi. E se la pena non piomba sul mio capo, a mie rimorso il poter di castigarmi. Questa è la disperata chiari a Roma andando presento il mio morir. Mi si perdoni, il delitto è secreto, ond'io macchiai involontario il nostro onor. Un altro più detestabil colpa di non m'aver ucciso pria del misfatto mi si perdoni. Già nel sino comincia a compir questo fermo i tuoi uffizi. Sento che il cor si scuote più dal dolor di questa caduta invendicata che dal furor della vicina morte. Ma se qui non m'è dato castigare il tiranno, opprime l'empio, con più barbaro esempio, perché se caro estinto stringerò ad di sua tassetto il furibondo e crudo nell'inferno farò la mia vendetta.
It's very difficult to follow that, but we'll try. And of course, ancient Rome isn't always about heroism and self-sacrifice and tragedy. There is, of course, a playful side, and in particular, the way the Romans, even in their day, could have a little fun with their deities and some of these mythological stories. And of course, later poets and musicians, as well as artists, could enjoy the same kind of privilege. In the exhibition, you will see several representations of Aphrodite, the goddess of love. And I should say, the curators went back and forth about, should we use Greek or Roman names for these deities, since they are often parallel and they cross over. But when things seem to be inspired directly by Greek art or Greek myths, the Greek names were chosen instead. But here is Aphrodite posing with her son Eros or Cupid, and a sea monster who was probably originally a dolphin. Here are the Torlonia Foundation's conservation diagrams, and you can see the white areas are ancient and original to the sculpture. The pink areas are ancient but added, not original. And the blue areas are later restoration. This happened, as I said, quite a lot with objects in this collection. And I love the fact that we're doing these conservation diagrams, and I hope you've enjoyed them too, because first of all, it means that we're being honest and that we are saying that not everything that you're seeing is absolutely ancient, because we know it wasn't. And also that we are honestly presenting these works as these richly layered objects that take on so many layers and years and decades and centuries of history behind them, but also because it gets people to look very closely at the objects. And here's another example that I really love, which is this Athena. That is, the head that she now has is probably her third head. She had a head in ancient times, and then we know, thanks to engravings of the Giustiniani collection, where she was in the 17th century, that there was a different head. And this third one was likely added by the Torlonias in the 19th century, and they also added the owl in her hand, which is actually an emblem of the Torlonia family, in addition to being traditionally associated with the goddess Athena. And then there is this reverence for Greek culture, but again, this sort of playing with mythology. One of the themes of the exhibition is this idea of multiples, of copies. And we don't even like to say Roman copies of Greek originals anymore, because it's so incredibly complicated that are these copies, variants, variations, new versions. Are they, to what originals do they go back to? There are two sculptures of the story of Leda and the Swan in the Torlonia collection, and we have the two of them. And the one in the middle is the one that is in the Buxbaum galleries, and it is the one that the Torlonia Foundation has deliberately left it in a only semi-cleaned state, so that you can see just how filthy these things were before they were cleaned, and you can also see some of the obvious breaks, between the later restorations and the more ancient sections, or sections that were added. And then the other more cleaned Torlonia version of Leda and the Swan is on the left, and then on the right is the sculpture that it is actually next to in our Jaeharis galleries, which is a work from a private collection that is on loan to the Art Institute, and so you can make a comparison. Supposedly, this sculptural group was inspired by a Greek sculptor, a work by the Greek sculptor Timotheus from the 4th century BCE, but now we're not sure if Timotheus ever even did a Leda and the Swan. And you can see that when things get restored, they get restored in different ways. Leda's head will be in a different position. It'll be a slightly different expression. She and the Swan will, shall we say, relate to each other in different ways. The Swan being, of course, the god Zeus in disguise, and she's fending off Zeus's eagle as it is trying to attack them. The playfulness, the elements of Aphrodite or Venus and Cupid play out in so many different ways. This wonderful group of a pair of Cupid and Psyche, in which Cupid for the first time falls in love. But Psyche, the Greek word psyche, the Greek word for the soul, the story becomes an allegory of the desire of love for a soul, or the desire of one soul for another, of finding one's soulmate. And this is, we know it's Psyche because she has the butterfly wings, which were added later, that become her own particular emblem. And we're so fond of this twosome. They appear on the cover of the catalog for the Myth and Marble exhibition, and they are a very tender and sweet couple. The works you're going to hear in this section, there will be 3 works that you will hear in contrasting Italian, English, and French. We'll begin with an aria by this composer, Duni, Egidio Duni, who wrote successfully many Italian operas and then later operas in French in France. And it is an aria from his opera Nerone, the Roman Emperor Nero. And I suppose suitably for Nero, it is a kind of a crazy piece. It's a da capo aria with a lot of complexity to it. And I love this. This is sort of our typical image of Nero as developed later on, but with echoes from antiquity of this sort of strange, monstrous figure against a lurid background, and the concept of, somehow Vesuvius is erupting as well as Rome being on fire. And so it's just, you'll hear that, some of these kind of extreme qualities in the aria, which we'll hear about in a little bit. We will hear also selections from this French opera by Élisabeth Jacquet de la Guerre of the story of Semele, a princess who is loved by Zeus, desired by Zeus. They have an affair, and then she foolishly asks Zeus to show himself to her in his full godhead and divinity, and with the thunderbolts blazing, and she is unfortunately sort of burnt to a crisp, but not before becoming pregnant with the god Dionysus, who also figures in the exhibition as well. And this gorgeous, strange 19th century painting by Gustave Moreau conveys these qualities of the kind of, the 19th century really understood just how weird these Greek myths are, but these earlier composers and artists often also felt the same way about it, as you'll hear in some of these pieces. And then we also hear this delightful piece by Purcell, Cupid the Slyest Rogue Alive, which is based on a translation of the 19th idyll of Theocritus, which you'll hear a little bit more about, in which Cupid, the stinger, gets stung, in this case by a bee. Here's a painting by Benjamin West. And this subject, in this painting in the Art Institute collection by the 16th century painter Luca Cambiaso, may illustrate this subject as well. We're not sure, but he does have his little index finger pointing up as he sits in his mother's lap. It's sort of like, Mommy, I got boo-boo here. So you'll hear an introduction to the pieces and a little bit more discussion about them, and then performances of them. Let me back up. There is Duni.
Yes, our next music comes from Egidio Duni's opera Nerone about Nero, certainly one of the more, shall we say, morally compromised of the Roman leaders, which is saying a lot, I guess. We're about to perform the coronation of Poppaea at Northwestern, and sometimes in rehearsal, students will say, wow, this Nero was really a pretty bad person. I say, don't worry, there's nothing in the opera worse than what he did in real life. And in the spirit of excavation, this music actually was sort of brought back to life at the beginning of, near the beginning of this century. There was one copy of the manuscript that we knew was on microfilm at the University of California at Davis. So I went there and was able to retrieve this and sent it to a wonderful musicologist in Italy named Dinko Fabris. And it was produced into parts, and the next year, in 2008, we gave the first modern performance in the ancient Italian city of Matera. Duni was the predecessor and teacher of Niccolò Piccini, who became a very important composer in the middle of the 18th century.
And if you think during this piece, it sounds vocally like it's too high and too low, you're right. It's supposed to sound a little crazy, a little unhinged, because he was that. He describes how his passions are like a wave going to the beach. They're unstoppable, and if there's a barrier, he will crash right through it. He says very proudly. So enjoy this crazy piece.
Si trova ritegno al corso dell'onda al corso dell'onda. Ripieno di sdegno, minaccia la sponda, torrenti orgoglioso, fremendo sen va. Minaccia la sponda, se pieno di sdegno, fremendo sen va, fremendo sen va, fremendo sen va. Si trova ritegno al corso dell'onda, ripieno di sdegno, minaccia la sponda. Torrenti orgoglioso, fremendo sen va, minaccia la sponda. Si trova ritegno al corso dell'onda, ripieno di sdegno, fremendo sen va. minaccia la sponda, ripieno di sdegno, fremendo sen va, fremendo sen va, fremendo sen va. Si trova ritegno, al corso dell'onda ripieno di sdegno, fremendo sen va. As Jeffrey already told you, this is a nice little funny story with Cupid and Venus. So Cupid gets stung by a bee while he is stealing honey. And he's really upset, he's in a lot of pain. So of course he runs to his mother, Venus, to, be comforted. But her reaction is very interesting. It's, well, this is what you do to people. You shoot these love arrows and they fall in love, and then all kind of problems come from that. So now you know maybe a little bit what it's like to be stung. So sorry, not sorry. Cupid, the slyest rogue alive, one day was plundering of a hive. But as with too eager haste he strove the liquid sweets to taste, a bee, surprised the heedless boy, pricked him and dashed the expected joy. The urchin, when he felt the smart of the envenomed angry dart, he kicked, he flung, he spurned the ground, he blowed and then he chafed the wound, he blowed and chafed the wound in vain. The robbing steel increased the pain. Straight to his mother's lip he hurls, with swelling cheeks and blubbering eyes. Cries she, what does my Cupid ill? When thus he told his mournful tale. Little bird they call a bee, with yellow wings. See, mother, see how it is gone and wounded me. And are not you, replied his mother, for all the world just such another peevish thing, like in bulk and like in sting. For when you aim a poisonous dart against some poor unwary heart, how little is the archer
So as Jeffrey already said, we're going now to Semele, an humble nymph who has a little fling with Jupiter. At least he says he's Jupiter, but they all say that. So she wants proof, and that's the moment that Jupiter, after lots of bugging, displays himself in his full glory, and as Jeffrey said, she burns to a crisp. But first there's a lot of thunderstorm going on because he doesn't appear in a flash. It's sort of the whole sky gets on fire and there's thunderstorms. And before she dies, though, she says, well, at least I was the girlfriend of a god. I mean, that says something good about me, right? So.
So we come to the final section of our program today. And a couple of things I want to point out before we hear the music. Some of the other outstanding pieces in the Torlonia Collection and in the Myth and Marble exhibition. Like many people later on looking back to Rome, ancient Rome, the Romans themselves looked back to the Greeks in many ways. And among other works in the collection and in the exhibition, you will find this work, the Hestia Justiniani, which belonged to the Justiniani family in the 17th century, hence the name. It is almost certainly a Roman copy it is Roman era, but it is almost certainly a copy of a Greek original of the early 5th century BCE, the very early classical period, which we sometimes now call the severe style, with this very kind of noble simplicity, this columnar-like effect to the drapery. Hestia is the Roman goddess, the Greek goddess of the hearth. The Roman equivalent was Vesta, who was famously served by the Vestal Virgins who guarded the sacred flame of Rome. We're almost certain that this is not Hestia. Hestia appears very little in Greek or Roman iconography, and she more likely represents some more, let's say, important goddess like Hera or Demeter. But I sort of like to think that she is Hestia, only because Hestia doesn't get represented enough in art, and because, as I've been saying to people, the other Olympian gods, and I mean this in as gender-neutral a way as possible, are all such drama queens. And Hestia just does her job. She sits there keeping the home fires burning, and so I like to think of her as the goddess who just takes care of the people who just get it done, even though we're almost certain that it's not Hestia. Also, one of the icons of the collection, this beautiful head portrait of a young woman. This is almost certainly done for a funerary context, parents dedicating this to the loss of their beloved daughter. This was excavated on a Torlonia property near Volci in the 19th century, hence she is known as the Maiden of Volci. And she would have had separate hairstyle carved separately, earrings in her ears. There were holes in her ears, as you can see, inlays of ivory or bone or glass for her eyes. And yet, even with those parts missing, you still feel this combination of sweetness and strength of character that I think conforms beautifully to the aria that you'll hear from Mozart's Clemenza di Tito, in which Servilia exhibits these kind of characters of doing the right thing while maintaining a kind of sweetness of demeanor, which is quite touching. And then I wanted to show this extraordinary work, which was excavated on a Torlonia estate near Porto, the ancient Roman port city of Portus. As we have been saying, the Romans were so imaginative that they called their port, which is Portus. And this Portus relief would be a votive relief, it seems, to thank the gods for, to quote Felix Mendelssohn, sort of calm sea and prosperous voyage, and returning safely to the home port. It's chock full of symbolism and elements that we know were part of the city of Portus, like this famous lighthouse in the back, topped with a flame, which in the sculpture preserves some of the original pigment. There's a little red and pink that you can see elsewhere in the sculpture. This sculpture over here, standing on a pedestal, likely represents a real sculpture that was in Portus, which symbolizes the personification, the spirit of Portus. And we know that because he's got the Portus lighthouse on top of his head, and then possibly the spirit of the Roman people. There is a ship, Roman ship, because it has on the sails, the she-wolf suckling Romulus and Remus, the mythical founding of Rome. Deities like Neptune, who guards the seas, and Dionysus or Bacchus, or as the Romans called him also, Liber Pater, free father, who had a temple at Portus. Big apotropaic eye to ward off evil, the evil eye and evil spirits. And the final piece on the program, an aria from Handel's Giulio Cesare in Egitto, Julius Caesar in Egypt, which depicts the relationship between Julius Caesar and the legendary Cleopatra, we so often think of Cleopatra through a kind of 19th century Orientalist lens as this seductive, exotic temptress. But Handel portrays her more in a more queenly, complex, seductive to be sure, but a queenly and complex and heroic character. And so we'll conclude with the aria, which is about bringing your ship safely to harbor as a metaphor for surviving the vicissitudes of life.
Our final piece is really a piece about relief. Cleopatra sings, imagine that all the people you love are on a ship and the ship has sunk. So you're in despair. But lo and behold, there the ship appears and everyone is fine. And she bursts out in very happy, virtuosic Handelian singing. So lovely to perform for you today, and hope you have a really lovely rest of the Sunday. Or is it Sunday?
It's Saturday.
Enjoy your entire weekend.
Da tempore più che